Thanks everyone for attending. This is a short Be Heard session on how NFTs would potentially be treated under Indian law. So where do they fall? How do you recognize transactions involving NFTs? And what do they actually mean to sell or transfer, trade in NFTs? So to start off with, look at what is the NFT. So it's a digital asset that has been tokenized. You start with the asset itself. It might be this Bored Ape, which is just an artwork. You attach a token ID to it. A single copy of a Bored Ape will have a token ID that's attached to it. And around that token, you encapsulate it in a smart contract. The moment you encapsulate it in a smart contract, that becomes the NFT. Now with the NFT, you don't have any ownership rights in the artwork. What you get is ownership rights in the token. That is the token ID with the smart contract. And what that does, the smart contract is essentially analogous to a URL on the blockchain. It's a reference, it refers to a specific cell on the blockchain where all of this data and metadata is stored concerning the ownership rights in that particular token. What you get with an NFT is ownership over a copy of the digital art. So it's a tradable license.
But it's always a purchase, right? Like you're always buying the artwork.
No, you're buying the token. That's what. You're just buying the token.
This is only a single copy of it.
No, so the Bored Ape, Bored Ape, I'll come to it later. As with Bored Ape, you actually purchase the artwork as well. But other NFTs, NBA, Top Shots, all you're purchasing is a copy of that license. That's why NBA Top Shots, you have 10, or you have artificial scarcity that's built in. So you have 100 copies of that particular content being minted as an NFT. What that essentially means is that of each individual, you don't own the individual artwork, but you own the token. And there's a license that applies, which has obligations both ways. So one, you have a right to non-commercial use, and the licensor is obligated not to produce more than 100. So it's a two-way contract, which creates that scarce pool.
So just one more thing. Is that contract actually put on the blockchain?
Yeah, the contract reference is added to the blockchain. So the metadata contains a reference to the underlying contract.
Like an ID of the contract?
Yeah, a reference to the contract. Either it'll be stored on IPS, in which case it's stored as on the blockchain itself, or the rights will be captured by reference to, let's say, your NBAP terms of use. So your Top Shots terms of use.
Okay.
So that's where the license lies. But there's always a reference that's drawn into this. Okay, so that's essentially what the NFT is. Now, how does the NFT work? So once you have the artwork that's minted as the NFT, the initial sale happens through the smart contract itself. Now, the way the smart contract works is that it generates a binary output. It's either the sale is completed or it's not completed. And the trigger is the transfer of the relevant amount of currency. Now, the currency when started off under the Ethereum standard had to be ETH. But now you can even offer it in fiat currency, where the smart contract builds in that conversion mechanism. So what happens in the smart contract is essentially the smart contract is a wallet by itself. It has its own MetaMask ID. A buyer uses their MetaMask, transfers the relevant amount into the smart contract. The smart contract closes. Once it closes, that means the transaction is complete. The completion of a transaction essentially operates to transfer that NFT from the first creator into the buyer's name. So it links up with the buyer's MetaMask. And the moment the transaction closes, the smart contract also has the distribution built in. So this is what happens here. And the entire transaction is loaded onto the blockchain. So you must have heard of gas fees, which is paid with every transaction of an NFT. The gas fees is just the minting cost for minting that transaction record onto the blockchain. So that's paid out in a proof of stakes model. It's paid out to all of the validators who are creating that blockchain. And what the smart contract does after the sale is complete, once it closes, is that it distributes the income generated, the currency that came in, it distributes it according to an inbuilt mechanism. So the best example is the NBPA and the NBA who run Top Shots. So they've licensed content to Dapper Labs. Dapper Labs engages in minting the NFT. And their smart contracts have the royalty built in. So on completion of a sale, 10% of that income flows to NBA, the Players Association, NBPA. Another 15% flows to NBA, and Dapper Labs keeps the remaining. So that's how this is built into the smart contract itself. So it happens automatically.
So you want questions all the time, or you
I'm
pause for questions?
I'm comfortable either way, so I can finish the slide, open it up for questions. But I think the format is such that I'll finish my presentation and then we have a Q&A.
Because we lose track of it. So much of information you're giving.
We'll come back to it. So when we have a question, we can always come back to the slide. I'll quickly run through the slides itself. So this is the background to it. Now, with NFTs, you can also engage in secondary transactions. So the first buyer can they can edit their smart contract or apply a new smart contract, because the smart contract is a templatized form. That's part built into the standard itself. So what they do is they set out what is the fee. If they want to sell the NFT, then they set out what is the fee that I expect. They build it into the smart contract and then list it on an OpenSea or any other platform. You can have closed platform, open platforms. The enforceability of it we'll get to in the next slide. So here you have the same artwork. You have buyer 2 who's interested. And in this case also, the payment goes into the MetaMask of that smart contract, into the wallet of that smart contract on the blockchain. In all cases with NFTs, the payment is always made into the MetaMask of that relevant smart contract. So each smart contract constitutes an individual ID, has an individual ID and an identifier on the blockchain. And they have their own wallet. Because that is essentially how that's the closing mechanism. That's the only enforcement mechanism that exists with the smart contract. So in the same manner, the payment goes through. The moment the smart contract closes, then the closing conditions apply. That is, the NFT stands transferred to the new buyer, and the amount that's come in gets transferred and distributed to the relevant parties within that. Now, major NFT providers actually provide you with the smart contract format because they build in their royalties in the secondary sales. So, like NBPA gets 10% of primary sales, which is from Dapper Labs to the first buyer. They get 5% of secondary sales. So when the first buyer sells to another buyer, or the second buyer sells to anyone, then in that case, 5% of whatever revenue comes in is paid out to NBPA. 10% is paid out to NBA. Dapper Labs also takes a certain amount of its as royalty, and the remaining comes to the first buyer. So that's essentially how how an NFT is created and what a transaction of buying or selling an NFT comprises of. And all this gets recorded on the blockchain. So that's why you have a transaction record that's created, which verifies the ownership from the creator all the way to the person who's claiming ownership. So this is effectively like a registry. And that's where the blockchain comes in as a distributed platform, as a distributed verification network. Now, what are the use cases for NFTs? Right now, you'd see NFTs being sold as collectibles, individual moments. Dhoni's winning 6 of the World Cup. LeBron James, not that one. Tom Brady's 60-yard throw that won the Super Bowl. All of those are being minted as NFTs and being sold as digital collectibles. Now, this doesn't mean that the collectible cannot be, it's effectively sold as art, where the moment is tokenized and you have a limited number of tokens that are issued of that individual moment. With art, typically you'll see only a single NFT being sold. You'll see this with Manchester City's One Drop, where they contracted with the artist continues to own the rights to it, but has committed to create only one copy of it. So when you purchase that, that's it. Same thing with Beeple. Beeple's 5,000 years, there's only a single copy of it that's been generated, and that has been minted as an NFT. So these are commitments that are made by the creator or the artist in order to ensure that the memorabilia is scarce, and you have effectively bragging rights that are attached to ownership, and it's capable of ownership. It doesn't dilute the value of the NFT itself by the creation of multiple copies. Then you have art, memorabilia, iconic moments, iconic tweets. Jack Dorsey's first tweet, which was listed for, I think, 120 million, finally sold for 147, but that's the nature of the market. And even memes have been increasingly been turned to NFTs. This doesn't restrict the usage of the NFT itself as an image, because copyright law still applies to the underlying artwork. So you still have fair use rights. You can still use it for non-commercial purposes, you can still display it, but you can't claim ownership over the token. So the token is differentiable from the underlying art. And that's what underpins the entire NFT ecosystem. The other is, you can look at NFTs as a means, you can attach utility to NFTs, create fan loyalty programs. So those are called utility tokens, where each individual token becomes effectively a commodity. You can purchase it, you get access to an exclusive club, the Bored Art Yacht Club, the Bored Ape that I've shown you. There are 30,000 Bored Apes that have been generated, and that's the limit. It gives you access to an exclusive social club. And that's where the value of it. So the value of this sort of NFT arises from the experience that's attached to it. Man City, PSG, all of them have their own fan loyalty programs, where the currency is the NFT. You can redeem it for merchandise, or you can purchase it either from the creator directly or through the secondary market, and use that in order to gain access to experiences. They have voting rights. For example, you can decide on how Neymar is introduced, or a new signing is introduced, by voting based on your NFTs, on your NFT holding. Then ticketing and verification. This is actually one of the first use cases of NFTs in India. So the PKL final, each of the tickets was minted as an NFT. So you're verifying the purchase through the blockchain. And this also prevented black marketing of those tickets because the identity was attached to the ticket purchase. So for this, they'd use Matic because I think it was... the gas fees is really low, and it also works on the Ethereum network because of Neo protocol. So I think Matic was what they finally went with. But right now, for ticketing verification, there are specific blockchains that have been created. Aurora does it and offers a service. Tezos is tying up with Man City to offer ticketing services and payment processing. So the tickets will be issued on the Tezos blockchain. So there are possibilities, and this is actually seen as a viable use case for crypto trusts. The last is authentication. NFTs can also be attached to physical assets, to physical collectibles, in order to authenticate ownership. So when you transfer that physical asset or collectible, the NFT is also transferred with it, and that creates a transaction record. This is using the NFT in place of a certificate, a physical certificate. You're digitizing it and rendering it on the blockchain so that the transaction history is verifiable and accessible. Now, what are the different rights at play when you look at NFTs? The first one is the actual asset. Who owns the asset? In most cases, it's the creator who continues to own the copyright in that asset. So copyright law, all of these fundamental laws and principles still apply with NFTs. It doesn't change the fundamental nature of the relationship between a licensee and a licensor, between a creator and a buyer. In all these cases, the license, effectively what you get is a licensed copy of that asset. And with that license copy come certain restrictions. So the license conditions are spelled out and are built into the NFT itself. Really sorry. So what are the obligations of the creator? After you've created the asset, the minting of it essentially means that they're linking it with the token. So the creator licenses it perpetually to the token, and that license cannot be terminated unless there is a breach. It's not a fixed term license, because then the value of the token reduces to zero. And it's also misrepresentation if you've sold it as linked to an underlying asset, but that asset becomes inaccessible. So that's why it's a perpetual royalty-free license with the smart contract capturing your commission rates. So those are fixed upfront, and those are not capable of variation. And the creator is also obligated to ensure scarcity. It is a warranty that the creator makes that they will not produce more than X amount. So that's why these terms have to be disclosed upfront at the time of purchase, because they determine the value of the NFT and the continuing potential. So a person is purchasing the NFT either from the side of a collectible or for the purpose of holding, with the intent of monetizing at a later stage. And that only makes sense if there is committed scarcity. And also on the marketability front, the tradability of the NFT is a key component. And marketability is something that is also a legal right that attaches to a purchase, which is why legal recognition and placing an NFT within Indian law is important. There are a few alternate positions here. So, for example, the Board Ape Yacht Club, the first NFT that I shared, in that the underlying asset itself is assigned. So you actually own the rights in that individual Board Ape. So the art, that's how they build in scarcity. Because the creator doesn't retain any rights in the Board Ape. That is transferred entirely to the first buyer. And thereafter, their smart contract is built such that the assignment is built in to the actual transfer. So any purchaser of a Board Ape owns the actual asset. Then I by Man City. In this case, most NFTs only permit you to digitally display it for non-commercial purposes, not to associate your brand with the NFT or generate other commercial benefits in that manner. I by Man City also allowed you to take one physical copy and display it within for personal purposes. So it was a mix of, it was a digital artwork that was capable of a physical reflection. And what are the intellectual property rights then at play? You're seeing NFTs being created from broadcast content, from performance content. So what are the rights that apply? In a single NFT, for example, in Dhoni's 6, you have intellectual property rights, MRF, Reebok on his bat. That's a trademark. That's a valuable right. And you can't use that or commercialize that without Reebok's consent. The content is owned by the ICC because it was the World Cup. The content was generated by Star in India because that was the official broadcaster. So there's a full gamut of rights at play, depending on what is the nature of contribution to the creation of that content. Dhoni also himself has personality rights in that. Commercializing personality rights, they are proprietary rights. So commercializing them requires his consent and involvement. The reason Top Shots engaged with both the NBA, Dapper Labs engaged with both the NBA and the NBPA while creating Top Shots was to ensure that players are remunerated for the grant of their personality rights. The NBA is remunerated for the grant of content rights and trademark rights. As well as the NBA represents, it's a federation, so the NBA represents the individual teams as well. So the teams are also compensated for granting rights to their individual logos.
Yeah. Can you explain which right, in the Dhoni's case,
Yeah.
Which right to broadcast right, I presume, is for Star?
So broadcast rights are with Star, but ICC has a residuary right. So the actual broadcast content is always owned by the ICC. But the content has been produced by Star. So Star is remunerated for the service of production. ICC owns the broadcast. ICC owns the event mark, the ICC World Cup. Dhoni has his personality rights. And the individual intellectual property rights that apply would be your trademarks in his bat, in the BCCI logo. All of those are trademarks. The BCCI also licenses his logo separately from the ICC. It differs from a private professional league in that the BCCI is not represented by the ICC for commercialization. So it has its own commercialization program.
And all these will be party to the smart contract.
All of these will either be party to the smart contract or they will license their rights to an individual entity like the ICC, which is engaging in generating the NFT.
Smart contract is written.
Yeah.
All these people have to come on board.
Yeah. The person who's minting the smart contract, who's minting the NFT, has to acquire these rights either directly or by proxy. So the ICC has tied up with FanCraze, for example. Now, the ICC has taken the relevant NOCs, or they've built it into their playing contracts, that I can commercialize player profiles, player images, if they are part of my ICC event. So they've already taken that consent and that license under their playing contracts. It's the same with when countries participate in an ICC event, they're signing on to a playing contract. So the rights that the ICC needs in order to broadcast the event, in order to commercialize the event, have to be built into the contract that it executes. Otherwise, it has to go back to each individual entity and get their rights separately.
And if there is a dispute, where's the redressal?
So dispute will be through the normal court process. It is an intellectual property claim. So in your playing contract, you'll have jurisdiction set out in Dubai or in the ICC prefers England and Wales. since that's where they were established. So your jurisdiction is based there. So you file a claim there and seek compensation or royalties. So the dispute remains grounded in the relevant rights framework. So, for example, with this meme, the actual photo was taken by her father. It was commercialized by her. So the question was really whether she acquired the rights to the photograph from her father, because he is the first owner of that copyright. So having rights clearance is important. Ultimately, the NFT was cleared with an NOC from her father. Then this is the first 500 days, 5,000 days, which is 5,000 individual artworks that were released over a period of 2.5 years by people. Each of these, some of these were original artworks, some of them were caricatures. So here, the argument was Beeple owns these because they are transformative. Fair use applies. So he didn't need Donald Trump's consent in order to commercialize this, because one of the artworks was Donald Trump. There was Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. But it was sufficiently transformative that he could claim a fair use right in them. So none of the individuals who were a part of this were entitled to any royalties, because the usage of their image was permitted by law. And this is the manner in which the law applies in the context of NFTs. Because the fundamental principle remains the same. If a physical artwork that's created using someone's caricature is transformative and differentiable and doesn't infringe their personality rights, the digital asset doesn't as well.
So, are you saying that there are 5,000 copyrights for each image?
Yeah, there are 5,000 individual copyrights.
So there's a
Yeah.
copyright for each image.
For each image. They've been generated by the same.
Of one creator? Or
Yeah, one creator created all 5,000 and he rendered this in a collage and then sold this as an NFT.
yeah, I think this is the highest.
This is 69 million.
69 million now.
After that, there was one for 112 million, which was again Beeple. It was the Beeple Spaceman. Now, how do you characterize NFTs? So when you're looking at characterizing NFTs, why is it important to characterize them? Because you're creating this entire rights framework in NFTs by saying you can purchase an NFT. But what does a purchase actually mean if it's not recognized in law? Because ultimately, the state sanction is your enforcing authority. The state is the only one in the position to enforce rights that are claimed, whether it's an NFT or a physical asset. So the first is whether the NFT is property, whether it's capable of recognition as property. Now, fundamental principles in India, in the case of property, are governed by the Immovable Properties Act and the Sale of Goods Act. One is from 1885, the other is from 1930. So that's why even the sale of goods defines a good as a physical asset, a tangible asset that is not standing crop. And that's not immovable property. So it's an all-inclusive definition, but still needs the asset to be physical. Immovable property is physical property, so that we can keep out because that's inapplicable here. But this is not a new issue that's been faced by this definition of a good. So in the case of Infosys, especially with digital products being sold as individual copies, the question that came up was whether the transaction of that can be treated as a sale or is it a pure license. So in this case, the definition of a good was adapted. What you're looking at is whether the sale of a software product is analogous to the sale of a physical product. And if it is, then functional equivalence, you can apply the principle of functional equivalence, that what's true in the physical realm is also true in the online realm, or in any other media, to recognize that sale. So in the case of Infosys, the definition of a good was changed to either tangible or intangible, as tangible or intangible property that is capable of ownership, that is capable of being sold. Now, using that definition, the way an NFT is conceived of, it's the token itself is capable of ownership. It is sold, is presented as something that's capable of ownership, that's capable of being traded. The token is recorded. The sale transaction is recorded over a publicly accessible ledger. All of these essentially validate a transaction and allow it to be construed as property, as a good. So an argument can be made that the sale of an NFT is the sale of a good. In the same way that the sale of a CD containing software is the sale of a good. What you're purchasing is that individual license that is embedded on the CD. You have property rights and you have ownership rights in the CD, in the physical medium that captures the license. You don't have ownership rights in the software that's embedded on it. In this case, the CD is the wrapper, which is where it always comes back to. The wrapper is differentiable from the underlying content, and what you get is ownership in the wrapper. Now, why is recognition under the sale of goods important? Why is it necessary? Because such.
So do you mean that the embedded blockchain is the asset?
Not the embedded blockchain.
Tangible or not tangible?
It's intangible. Intangible. The cell recording, the record,
The recording.
that is the token, that is the asset, and that is the property. So what you're getting is ownership in the wrapper, in the token ID and the smart contract, and that is a record on the blockchain, which is referred to by the smart contract ID. So it's addressable, it's verifiable, and it sets out your transaction history. So then the requirement of also recording is captured there. And why is this important? Because the sale of goods provides certain rights and remedies in the case of any sale of goods. One of the representations that underlies any sale of good is that the product meets the description. If you're sold an NFT stating that this is a Beeple artwork, but the NFT license, the underlying asset, differs, then you have remedies. Because that is a false sale. That's a misrepresentation. The sale of good comes with marketability, merchantability. That the product can be onward sold. You cannot restrict someone from selling it onward. That also becomes a right. That the moment you recognize a product like an NFT as a good, that means these are rights attached to it. The other one is security. Now, where does securities law apply in the case of NFTs? As a pure collectible, first of what is a security? Now, the definition of a security differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions look at it as merely a financial instrument that's capable of generating returns. This is how the US looks at it. It's a very wide definition, so which is why services like Kalshi, which are engaged in providing options on events, can be recognized as securities. Because the optionality of it and the potential returns that come from investing in that render it a security. In the US, you have the Holy Test, which determines whether a particular asset is a security or it's treated as a good. In India, the definition of security differs greatly. In India, we have an exhaustive definition of what constitutes security. So, an Indian security is an instrument that generates value by reference to either by reference to the difference in the movement of an underlying good, so differences contract or a price contract and options contract, or even an index contract, or is attached to a company or an entity, and the value of it derives from the manner in which the company operates. So security is a share, debenture, stock, one hand, or it's a derivative. Those are two broad categories of securities that are recognized. So it's either equity or debt, which is termed a security, so bond, debenture, or it's in the realm of a commodities derivative. In derivatives, the important one for us to consider in the context of NFTs is the commodity derivative. Now, what is a commodity derivative in India? It's any contract or any security that derives its value from the value of the underlying commodity, but it doesn't include a ready delivery contract. So a contract that is settled immediately, where the transfer occurs, that doesn't count as a derivative. There has to be some amount of optionality. There has to be some amount of risk attribution that applies. So a futures contract is a derivative, but a ready delivery contract is not. So commodities trading in primary commodities is an unregulated category unless there are futures applied, in which case the MCX applies. So that's a very important distinction to draw. Because in the case of NFTs, as they currently exist, as collectibles, the smart contract is immediately settled. It's not a contract for future purchase. It's not fixing the price of sale at a future date. So an NFT by itself isn't a security. But if you look at the use cases, the potential use cases of NFTs, where they can be used for decentralized finance, and you buy an individual unit, you contribute to the pool, which can be used for lending operations, and you get dividends out of it. It's analogous to a share of security. In that case, it starts getting into the realm of being treated as security. You can also engage in futures contracts for NFTs, in which case you're purchasing it now, but entering into an agreement to purchase it at a later date. And then you start, if you securitize that and generate revenue out of it, then that gets into the realm of security. So the use case is very important when you're considering whether an NFT could become a security. And that's the presentation. Thank you to Be Heard. Thank you to the BIC for organizing this event. We had a wonderful audience and lots of questions. The talk itself was about situating NFTs within in Indian legal jurisprudence, placing it within and recognizing the actual transaction in order for rights and duties to be clarified and to ensure enforceability through state sanction. In the presentation, we got some wonderful questions from people about what is the potential use case for NFTs, how utility tokens differ from collectible tokens, and also the necessity of recognizing the different form of contracting in NFTs to ensure that it incidentally doesn't become a security that's governed by securities law. So how do you situate your transaction within the context of a good? These are the sort of questions that we got. Why is it necessary and why is it important to recognize an NFT as a good? And what are the consequences, what are the benefits of such recognition? Thank you.